welcome to the Antonov An-225, also known as Myira, an aircraft that almost needs no introduction due to just what a legendary aircraft it's been. So what are we going to do today? We're going to take a look at the history of the An-225, then we're going to go for a quick exterior view, have a look at all the details that are on the outside, come back onto the inside, take a look around the cargo hold, the flight deck, and then we're going to check out the EFB and some of the functions of how to load and unload the cargo on the Antonov 225. So without further ado, I can't wait to show you this aircraft. Let's get on with it. Let's talk about the history of Myira. She first flew in 1988, December of that year, so actually it's a bit newer than I first thought. It's to put it into perspective, it's newer than the A320. It's based on the An-124, the Ruslan. Now this was a great place to start. The Ruslan in itself is a strategic heavy lift transport aircraft, but what they needed is they needed more capability. So they took the An-124 as its base and expanded it in every single area. The key to Myira is big. Everything's big, everything's heavy, everything is so impressive. So it's got 640,000 kilos maximum takeoff weight, which is the heaviest in ever. 550,000 kilos maximum landing weight. That's crazy when you think about it. And it can take up to 255,000 kilos of payload, which is an all-time world record. Not even close. Nothing comes even close to that. The second closest is over 120 tons less, which just shows you this unique role that she played throughout her whole life. Fast forward a few years, it's now 1994, and demand for Myira is just not there at that moment in time. So she goes into long-term storage. All 6 of her engines are removed, and she sits there waiting to come back to life. So that happens leading up to 2001, where the Antonov Design Bureau have found that they have had enough requests from customers that this niche of ultra-heavy cargo cannot be filled by their An-124, the Ruslan. So they bring her back to service with a fair few modifications. Now, unfortunately, things take it worse for Myira at this point. And in February 2022, she was heavily damaged at fighting at Antonov Airport, and to this day still remains there, ready to be rebuilt. And this is where the project comes into play. Every single purchase of the Myira in Microsoft Flight Simulator, 100% of that money will go to the Antonov Design Bureau and will be set aside to rebuild what I will call now, and they're calling it as well, Myira 2. So it will be a rebuilt version of the original Myira. They have a fuselage completely intact for a second An-225 that was never finished, and they're going to take the other parts from Myira, put them together, and we will end up with Myira 2. Personally, I cannot wait for the day that she can take to the skies again, because it's where she deserves to be. Now, let's take a look at the flight deck. First thing that strikes me about the flight deck is it is enormous. It's like a flying office. I love it. Now, why are there so many seats, and what does everybody do? Now, there are 6 permanent crew members, but of course, in the rear passenger area, there will be standby crew and other specialists that help. This is the flight crew. So, we have a captain, first officer, an electrical engineer, a navigator, and a radio operator. So having quite a few crew members in a cargo plane then wasn't that unusual. So that's where this sort of flight deck design and ethos comes from. So if we continue to look around the flight deck stations, on the main instrument panel, we've got quite a clear view. I would say it's nicely designed, there's not much clutter going on, and we've got clearly some older analog instruments. We have a HSI and some other things that we're aware of, and the autopilot panel at the top. Now moving down to the pedestal, we've got the iconic 6 thrust levers. Now there's not many jet aircraft in the world that have 6 thrust levers, but Myira does. So let's move back to the navigator's panel. Now it's quite unique to have a navigator station in any aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So what have we got modelled here? So here you can set your frequencies for your VOR, ILS, your navigation aids. If we move to the left, it's probably the loneliest position in the plane, and as Demetrius said, often forgotten position, the radio operator. So pretty much self-explanatory. Just do the radio. Let's move back to an extremely unique position, the electrical engineer panel. Now normally, engineer and electrical engineer are combined, but they are separated on Myira. Now here there's quite a lot of stuff that we can do. So we can power on all 5 batteries. You heard me right, 5 batteries. Normally Ruslan has 4, but Myira has 5. And if you leave these turned on, they will go flat. If you leave them on too long, they will actually overheat because they can't really run the aircraft for about more than 12-15 minutes before they'll actually start overheating because it's running everything in here and it's a pretty big aeroplane. Now, let's move across to the engineers panel. Now, in the engineers panel, we have all of the fuel pumps in front of us, all of the engine gauges, but by far the strangest place is this sort of 90-degree panel. Now, this is unique to Myira, and it comes down to an interesting sort of design philosophy that went on. Because they knew they were only building 1 or maybe 2, the idea was to try and keep as much commonality between Ruslan and Myira, which makes complete sense. But sometimes you run out of space. When you need 6 of everything, not 4 of everything, then you end up with no space left. So you created this little kick-out panel. Now, moving back to the front of the flight deck again, let's take a look at the navigation system. So we have installed the working title Garmin GNS 530. Myira did not have this installed, but there were Ruslan aircraft that actually had Garmin 430s, I believe, retrofitted into the navigations panel. So it's not an undue modification, but it does make life quite a bit easier in terms of integration, because we're obviously able to load routes from the world map and have all the fantastic work that the working title team have done integrated into Myira. You can still, of course, track a radial, VOR, manual navigation. That's still possible, but you can also use this GPS unit if you so wish. So let's move to the back of the aircraft. This is more of a transit/rest area. Here we've got some bench seats, and these will pull down to be beds, so other crew members can rest on long flights, because the aircraft can actually fly up to 12-15 hours if needed, so if it's empty with full tanks. At the front here we've got the emergency exit. This is actually a raft, I believe, that can carry up to something like 20 or 30 people. It must be a very big raft. And on the other side there we have a window which we can just about see out the wing. It's quite difficult to see there. Now this is the end of the pressurization section of the aircraft. This is why this door looks kind of like a big fridge door, because the cargo area is not pressurized. So let's move down the ladder into there now. So here we are in the cargo area. We've fully modeled this inside Microsoft Flight Simulator with the ladder that goes up to the flight deck. We've got the tow bar here. We take this with us on all of our flights because the aircraft is so unique that no one's got a tow bar for Ruslan or Myira, so you have to take it with you. And you also have got the overhead crane here, which was designed to pick up payload and take it down the plane if needed. Very self-sufficient aircraft. As you can see, this is enormous area. Now I'm going to put my camera down to actual head height to try and give you an idea here, and it's just huge. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and we have this solid titanium floor bringing us all the way back to the rear curtain here. So now let's go to the exterior of Myira and take a look around. With an aircraft this impressive, where do you even start? We have tried to put a lot of detail into the exterior modelling here. With no matter how close you get, you really shouldn't see a degradation in quality. We've got all of the probes and all of the markings all over the aircraft here at the front. There's even these little radiation symbols. I believe that's to do with the weather radar and things below that, but I'm not 100% sure, but they're all there as per the real aircraft. Moving across to the wing, we've got the 6 engines here. They are Motosich D18T engines. They produce around 51,000 pounds of thrust each, which is pretty impressive actually. In fact, it's very impressive. They are equivalent to, say, a Trent 500 Rolls-Royce engine or a CF6, a higher end one of those. But there's 6 of them, so that's pretty amazing. Now, when we look at the wing, very unique wing. 2 interesting things about it. First of all, it's an anhedral wing, which is fairly unusual for jet aircraft. So what does that mean? It means it's pointing downwards. I think it's around 5 or 6 degrees, something like that, that it actually slopes down, and that's why in flight it kind of bends up again, almost level. So it's kind of interesting. That's done for various stability reasons, but we won't get into that now. The other one is, if we take a look at the top of the wing, you might notice that the slats don't go all the way along the front. You think, why is that? There's a good reason for it. The reason is, remember we talked about commonality. Now, this little section here, with the bit that pokes out, is the new part for Myira. Now what they did is they put the extra engine on that, and then they put a Ruslan's wing on the end here. So this section here is the same as one from a Ruslan, which makes sense, right? Because the same parts, has already been made, it does its job perfectly, so they reused aspects of it, and that's why the slats don't go all the way, and that's why these two engines are spaced symmetrically, and this one isn't. So, fun fact for you. Moving around to the landing gear, you might think, why is there so many? I mean, it's impressive, but why are there so many? Now, the reason is to spread the weight out. This is the same for the nose wheel as well, where we have two of them. Now, airports all around the world use a thing called a PCN rating, which is basically how much weight can this piece of concrete or tarmac or whatever take per area. Now, think about it. We've got 640,000 kilos, and if we spread that over a bigger area, we can taxi on some of these airports, whereas otherwise we wouldn't have. These rear three wheels here steer the opposite way to the nose wheel to allow tight manoeuvrability on the ground. Obviously, it's not going to be a Cessna on the ground. It's still the world's biggest aeroplane, but it's actually pretty manoeuvrable. I really mean that. And we have that all set up in the flight model, so we actually have proper rear-wheel steering. So next to the wheels here, we have each APU. So one on the left and one on the right. They are TA12 APUs with the intake and outlets quite close to each other. A bit unusual to have two APUs. Remember I told you everything on Myira is bigger, so that's following that trend. If we move a bit further back, we've got two fins on the end of the horizontal stabilizer, which is pretty interesting. Normally on Ruslan you have a central fin. The reason we don't have here is for taking payloads on top of the aircraft, so there's room for them and it doesn't disturb the airflow to the fins. Pretty clever design. On the right hand side of the plane, pretty much the same as the left side. So what we're going to do now, we're going to hop inside and we're going to look at the EFB and open the main cargo door and take a look at that kneeling animation. Okay, so you join me at the EFB inside the 225. Now let's take a look at how we do this kneeling process. So we go onto the ground tab and we first select main door. Now below we have these selectors. Now what these do is they show you sort of the progress of the animation and of the actual kneeling process. This is more useful when it's in the realistic mode because it takes a lot longer. How do we get to that mode? Well, we can go on the options tab and currently it's set to fast, so it takes about a minute, 60 seconds. And on the realistic option, it takes around about 4 to 5 minutes, something like that. And you can keep a track of what's going on here. So first of all, the door is going to open, as we can see now. Then the legs are going to come down. Then the aircraft will kneel, and then the ramp will open out. So let's take a look at that from the outside. So here you can see the little legs are coming down. Now, what are these for? Well, what they do is they're going to support the weight of the aircraft when this nose gear is lifted up. Now, the lifting up of the nose gear is pretty complicated. It's one of the only aircraft in the world that actually has the ability to do this, especially given the weight and the scale of the aircraft. So shortly we should hear the hydraulic pump click on for this process. There it goes, it's got a unique sound, and now the wheel starts to move forward. But now you will notice the aircraft is actually tilting. We've been able to actually get the aircraft to kneel. So if you keep an eye on it, you can see it now going down. So we can also have a look at this if we check out the landing gear. So, remember we had all those different landing gear struts. And now if we take a look at them, can you see how the forward one, right at the front, is getting more and more and more compressed? And the rearmost one is going up, so it's getting less compressed. You can see this by looking how much of that silver you can see of the oleo strut. So, shortly we should see the process finish. So it's about here when the main legs touch down, and now the front ramp is going to open because the aircraft wheels are not taking any of the load. I might hear you add, what's the point? Why would you want to do this in the first place? Well, there's a few good reasons. First reason is at a remote destination, it really means that you don't need much, if any, equipment to unload and load the aircraft. You can even bring inside the aircraft a truck or a forklift with you and take the containers out. They can easily drive up and down this ramp here. Now, that comes to my second point. It's called approach angle, which is just the angle that you come at the aircraft to unload and load cargo. It makes it, well, take a look. It's pretty shallow. You know, it's quite easy to drive a vehicle up here and not sort of scrape the bottom out. And now you've got a very, very easy platform for loading and unloading cargo. So after the aircraft's in this knelt position, we can choose cargo to load. Now we have quite a few options. Truck, we have 2 fire trucks, we have a maglev train, 3 helicopters, a boiler, and back onto the cargo options, which will be populated if you have your own cargo set. Now the boiler is by far the heaviest payload. It's about 183 tons, and these loads here, most of them were taken by Myira for real flights, which you can replicate. And once you load them, the actual weight of those loads go into the aircraft without you having to do anything other than click load the cargo, and they will stay with you throughout the whole flight. So you can actually check on them, arrive, open the door, and it will be with you when you get there. A really cool feature, I think. So now let's jump into a very quick takeoff where we're going to wrap up the video. Okay, so here we are ready for takeoff. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about how the aircraft feels on rotation, some of the unique characteristics about it. Every takeoff is done with flaps full. That's kind of strange, even for large transport category aircraft. So it really doesn't need much of a rotation to get going. Now, if you've watched enough videos of the 225, you will have noticed that it kind of tends to sometimes slowly lift itself off the ground, and the nose wheel sometimes rises very, very slowly and then it takes off. Now, I think this comes from the fact that the rotation at the end is kind of because you've got so much lift from the flaps that it's kind of lifting itself off. That's the best way that I can describe it. So we're going to try and show you what that looks like now in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So we're quite heavy. We're about 520,000 kilos, something like that. So it's going to be a pretty heavyweight takeoff. So what we're going to do is we've done our engine warm-up before we got onto the runway here, so we're good to go to 40% and then just straight across to full power. Hopefully I was able to line the aircraft up reasonably okay. So that looks okay. So we're going to bring some of the thrust up now. You can hear the roar of all 6 of those D18T engines. Airspeed's increasing, it's looking good. Rotation speed is around about 270 kilometers per hour. We can look at our knots on the standby, so we're 120 knots now. And we're just waiting for that blue mark until we start to rotate. Runway's sort of running out, but look, I just do a very small rotation, see that? And now I can almost let go of the stick and see how the aircraft lifted itself off the ground. I'm not doing any input now, and I'm actually going to need to trim forward a little bit just to try and maintain our speed. Now if you go on YouTube and have a look at some 225 takeoffs, that's pretty much what happens with it. It's really kind of fascinating how it takes off. So now we're going to put the gear up, so the safety catch release, and the gear goes into the up position. Waiting for that now. So, thank you very much for watching this Welcome to the 225 video. I hope you found it interesting, also just to get you a little bit of an insight of how incredible this machine is and how it's going to be absolutely amazing for everyone to be able to experience that feeling of flight again in one of the most unique aircraft ever made. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Hello and welcome to this quick start video for the Antonov An-225. So what are we going to be covering in today's video? We're going to be doing a flight from Leipzig to Frankfurt using the InSim checklist system. I'm really going to keep procedures to what you need to know just to get the aircraft up into the air and en route. So how do we start? First of all, we're going to be using the InSim planning system. So our departure is going to be EDDP So Leipzig Airport, and we're going to be going from stand 101. Then we're going to be going to EDDF, and we want to choose on the left here, high altitude airways. So that approach looks fine to me, and that route looks good as well. So flight conditions wise, I recommend when you start using just few clouds, and that's what I'm going to do. Alright, so that's the route setup, and let's jump into the sim. Okay, here we are on stand 101 in Leipzig. So I actually selected that stand on the world map. What are we going to do? We're going to be using the in-sim checklist. Now, how do we get access to the in-sim checklist? We simply move our mouse up to the top and we have checklists. Now, definitely something I recommend is making sure that you have the autocomplete page function enabled. And this is inside your assistance options settings. So all we're going to do is click autocomplete, and we can hear a few things going on. Now you might notice that there's a bit of slowdown while this happens. That's because it's doing a lot of different items. Now at the moment, can you see how it says Copilot processing ... Well, it's waiting for that item that we're on to be completed. So we have to just sit here and wait. It's not broken, it's just waiting for that to be complete. And when it is complete, it's going to automatically go through all the rest of the checklist, and it's going to wait again for the second item, and then it will complete. So you're going to join me back when this whole checklist is completed, because you just basically have to just sit here and wait. Okay, so the electrical power up is now completed. Let's move on to fuel and hydraulics. We just click auto complete. Now there's a lot of fuel pumps that get flicked and things like this, so you'll hear a lot of things changing. And it's completed. So let's move to payload and setup. Now we can just auto-complete this one because this is how you load it using the iPad. And we're not going to be using that today. We're going to be keeping things nice and simple by using the weight and balance menu. This all fully functions, and we can set how much weight we want to carry here, and you can see that it's going to set it in all the different areas of the aeroplane. And we have our fuel. So by default, it loads in with 50% fuel. It's around about 80,000 kilos each side, so 160,000 kilos, which is a lot of fuel. So it's a lot of fuel, and it's enough to get you pretty far. So here's a really, really rough rule, and it's as rough as they come when it comes to sort of working range out. This plane uses around about 20,000 kilos an hour. That includes taxiing and taking off, so it's kind of like a high average. So if you think about it, if you've got 20,000 kilos in there, that's good for a 1 hour flight. 40,000 kilos is good for a 2 hour flight. And then 80,000 kilos is good for a 4 hour flight, etc., etc. So the default fuel that it loads in with here is actually plenty. It's normally enough to get you really quite far. So you can just leave it, and you can just adjust all this as you would in any other aeroplane. And we're going to move on to the autopilot setup. Now, there's a few things that I want to talk about here. So we're going to move down to the unit here. Now, this is just the normal working title GNS 530. And this video isn't going to really cover how you use this, because that is something that's used in a lot of different aeroplanes, and I want to try and keep this more focused on how we operate quickly the Antonov, because you may have a good knowledge of this. If you don't, I'm sure there are plenty of tutorials that show really good stuff about how this unit works as well. But there is one subtle difference. So can you see this little button here? If we press it, do you see how it kind of gets overridden? Now, you might say, well, why is that? You just told me it's a normal Garmin. It is, but it's coupled up to our custom autopilot, like the custom for the Antonov. And when you have that selector on the autopilot set to the right position, it will automatically set this for you. So it's actually easier. So basically, don't worry about that. Just make sure that you have the right mode set on the autopilot, and that's it. You don't have to worry about anything at all, and it will always set this to the correct mode. So what do we have to do? So setup as required. Well, we just turned it on, and when we look, our flight plan's in there because we just loaded it from the world maps. Nothing to do there. We can move up to the autopilot. Now, let's keep things really simple. Speed, you can set 300 in here. So this is 300 kilometers per hour. So this is all in kilometers per hour. If you want to have a conversion on the iPad, there is actually a section for converting. You can type in what you want and it will give you a conversion to the generically used units. So that is there if you want to. How high are we going to go? We're going to go up to 5,000 meters. Very rough rule. It's about times 3.3. So you can think about that. Or times 3 if you want to keep it very easy. So that's, what, about 15,000 feet plus 30%, so 18,000, 19,000 feet, which is fine. That's as high as we want to go to. Then we want to make sure we set this one to this position here, so that's navigation, and that's what we do, and that's done. So now the Garmin will be set up, and we can auto-complete that. So let's move back a little bit. Auto engine start. So we just click auto-complete, and again, it's now going to wait for the engines to automatically start up. There are 6 of them, and it takes a minute and a bit each. So this takes a while. This takes, at least 6 or 7 minutes to actually start all the engines up. And you might say, well, how can I track how far through I am? There's quite a few ways. So first of all, you can do it sort of the official way, if you want to call it that. Now this is the engineers panel, and you can see here, this shows you the engines, where they're moving, and you can see here this engine's now starting because this is the temperature for the engine, and you can see the nozzles rising. But by far the easiest way to see how many engines you have started is you see these red lights. Now they're the same red lights that we have flashing at the front here, and I can click this to stop them flashing. Do you see how one of them's gone out now? That means, hey, the engine is starting and is nearly started. So when these little lights go out, you know, hey, great, the engines are all gone. So when all these lights are out, you're good to go. So you're going to join me when this auto engine start is completed, because it's just going to move on itself afterwards and auto complete. Alright, so it's now finished as all the engines have started. So manual engine start, don't have to worry about this one, so we can skip this one here. After engine start, let's auto complete that and line up an engine run up. So we're now going to taxi out, and you're going to join me when we're by the runway. Alright, here we are holding short of the runway, so we're just going to auto-complete this now and take off. Now we have to do something a little different, so we now manually set the flaps down all the way. So we take off with the flaps all the way down, and we can check their position by looking at them here, or we can look on the outside view. And now we take off, so let's line up and take off. Okay, so what do we do to take off? Release the parking brake, and we just hold the power all the way down. There we go. We can just push it all the way forward, and now we're going. Remember this little blue mark here, so this little blue mark on the airspeed indicator, this is where we're going to pull back on the stick, okay? So that's our rotation speed as such. Yeah, so the little blue mark. So we can see there's 200 kilometers per hour, remember, kilometers per hour. And we're coming up to our little blue mark now, so I'm going to pull back on the stick. And off it comes, and now I can just sort of let go, and you can see it's flying quite nicely. So I'm going to auto-complete this page now, and that's going to do everything else for us in terms of the landing gear and things like that. So that's nice and simple. So let's try and make our workload a bit easier. Let's put the autopilot on, and now we can press the navigation. Now you notice it's not turning, right? So how do we fix that? So what we do is we need to tell it where to go, because the point's behind us. So we go direct to, and we just press enter, activate. And now look, there we go. See how we're turning en route? Now what we can do is to control our speed, we can press this button here, and that will now control the speed of what we have on the dial here. And now we have a look at the climb checklist. And I wouldn't recommend using autocomplete on this, because it's going to automatically put the flaps up for us, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to follow it through. So start accelerating slowly. That's what we're doing. And it has flaps. So it says set flaps 25, so 225 at 330. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to press this little white button here. Now if you know what it is, this acts as level change. So we'll press that on. And we're going to move the number up to 330. So once we get to 330, we're then going to go one stage of flap up, and then we're going to look at the next one. So it says 380, so now we're going to set 380. Now we're getting to 380, we go one up again. And now we're going to set 405. Like that. Getting there now, so we set that up as well. And then after that, it says to set 440. Just doing this to try and show you how easy it can be. Alrighty, we're getting close to the speed there. And now we set them all the way up. And now we can just leave that speed like that now, and it's going to automatically climb all the way up at this speed. So there's nothing else we need to do. So we can auto-complete this page now. So there we go. So everything's been done. So now the plane is going to climb all the way up, and it's going to follow the route that you have programmed in automatically. And for descent, it can be quite complicated in terms of where do we need to go, but I would use the VNav function. So if you know what that is, it's on this page here, VNav, and it works just like it does in any other Garmin videos. And on the other tutorial series we go over it, but I think it's a little bit complicated. I don't want to make this video more complicated than it needs to be, but that's a function that you can use, and it works the same way as any other Garmin. Okay, so this is where we're going to leave the video now, because for flying the approaches, I'm going to mention a few items here, but I like I said, I don't want to overcomplicate this video. If you know what it is, and if you want to fly an ILS approach, no worries if you don't know what it is. You set the frequency here, okay? So you set the frequency that you want to set, you put it in here. That's where you put it, and this is where you put the course. How I recommend, if you're new to this aircraft and you just want to do an approach, just do a visual approach. Make sure you have nice weather like I have today, clear skies or few clouds. When you get close to the runway, just disconnect the autopilot. So we do that by pressing this button here, and we disconnect the auto throttle for landing as well by pressing that button there, and you just visually fly the thing in and land it, because it's super fun to fly visually. It's nice and heavy, and you can really feel how it flies. If you want to follow a bit more complexity on this tutorials, we also have available the other tutorial series that goes through this in a fair bit more depth. Now we're going to jump back onto the ground, and we're going to explain some of the other options we have available for quickly getting you into the air. Here we are back on stand 101. So what other options do we have available for just getting ourselves going as quick as possible? First of all, if you load yourself onto the runway, then the aircraft will be fully set up, ready to take off, and then you can just take off as you did, following the rest of the checklist in the video. So that's an option that you can have. Or if you don't want to be bothered with all these automatic checklists, we can come and look at the iPad that we have here. And can you see this button here that says ready to fly? I'm just going to click this one button, and you can hear, whoa, everything is setting itself up. Now what this is doing is what I will call a quick start on the engine. So remember I told you it takes around 6 minutes for the engine to start. With this, it only takes about a minute or two. So if you just really want to get into plane and let's go, press that button, and it's going to start all the engines up, and it's going to set the flaps and everything, and you'll be ready to go. So you can also use that as an option to get going. Finally, let's talk about the AI co-pilot. So there is one thing that you have to do in this aircraft that is different from other aircraft to start off with. If you load onto the runway and you want to use your AI co-pilot, it will work, no problems at all. But if you load here, cold and dark, so with the aircraft shut down, what you must do before you activate your AI co-pilot is click the ready to fly. Just wait for the aircraft to start up, which should only take about a minute, and then we can go into our options menu, to our flight assistance, and then we can enable our AI co-pilot, and then it will work absolutely fine. It's just because we're using a custom electrical system, so the aircraft needs to be turned on first, and then it will be able to take over from that. I do hope that this quick start video was helpful. It just shows you the best and easiest way that you can get yourself up and going with the Antonov An-225. I do hope you enjoy flying the aircraft and having fun with it. And once again, if you want to learn a little bit more about it, we also have other video series available for the Antonov. Thank you very much.
Play it now with Game Pass.